people might say, well, look, nature's rivalrous. And so we take market dynamics as kind of an example of a social Darwinism of looking at how nature works and applying it to ourselves. And am I talking about something that sounds like it is not how nature works? Well, kind of yes and no. But this is really, really critical, because this is one place where people think they're thinking through formal systems, but they're the wrong formal systems. In nature, pre-humans, let's say pre-Homo habilis and the development of evolving technology or developing technology, we see micro rivalry, meaning this lion and this gazelle obviously in the moment of the chase have a rivalrous relationship with each other. The lion wants what the gazelle doesn't want, the gazelle wants what the lion doesn't want, and they're kind of mutually exclusive. So cool. We have a rivalrous dynamic there at a micro level, and yet gazelles as a whole species and lions as a whole species depend upon each other, and if either one died, the other one would probably go extinct. And so then we say, how is it that in nature, micro local rivalry leads to macro symbiosis and interdependence?
Yep.
And is it the same in humans or not? Because obviously social Darwinism and laissez-faire capitalism says, yes, it is the same. We compete and the best happens and we innovate, and those who produce the best goods and services at the best values who proliferates and have the most money, because money is a concentrated form of choice making, but they did the good things with choice, so they should have more choice making. Like, that's the idea, right?
Yep.
And it is gibberish. And it's important to understand really critically why it's gibberish. As soon as we developed technology, and I'm going to define what I mean by this very specifically in a moment, we changed the fundamental system dynamics, and the same system dynamics do not and cannot apply. So let's go to a chimpanzee who obviously uses tools, or a bird with a nest, or a beaver, or whatever, right? Like, they are tool users. If I give a chimpanzee, or if a chimpanzee just finds on its own a rock and it wants to cut some vine, and it just starts rubbing the rock across the vine, it experientially notices how good this particular rock is at cutting. It has a eminent experience of that. If it picks up another rock and they experience it cutting faster, they will use the sharper rock. If you give them a knife, they will experience it cutting faster and they will use the knife. But they have never invented knives, and there's a reason. Is that our current standard narrative said this started with Homo habilis, this kind of tool evolving capacity rather than just tool using capacity. So let's take that. So it requires the capacity for abstraction, which developed along with prefrontal cortex, etc., to be able to use this rock and feel the sharpness, and this rock and feel the sharpness, this rock feel the sharpness, and understand something that is none of the rocks, which is the abstract principle of sharpness. What makes something sharp, and how could I make something that is more sharp? Now I'm not focused on the instance of any of the rocks, but a principle that they all have in common, but that is none of them. That abstraction capacity seems to have emerged with some earlier hominid and then have zenithed in Homo sapiens. And that allows us to say, well, I would try chipping it to make an arrowhead, and then I would make a knife, and then I would make a laser, right? I can keep doubling down on the abstract principle of sharpness, so I get evolving tech. And this is why beavers are kind of doing the same thing they were doing a long time ago. With regard to tools, it was part of an evolved dynamic, and we are changing our entire environment one generation to the next so radically. Now, why does this matter? Evolution, and I know this is a bit of a long one, but this is because this is actually the heart of the whole fucking thing, so thank you for indulging me.
Yeah, it's okay.
Evolution is a kind of creative process, meaning it is a process by which new stuff comes to exist that didn't exist before. And when we think about what the process of evolution is, we have some kind of mutation and some kind of selection dynamics, right? So there is a distribution of things that are pretty similar but a little bit different. And then the ones that are a little bit different in a slightly more adaptive way in the moment, meaning can either survive or mate better, end up having a better chance of making it through. Whatever characteristics led to doing that get doubled down on, etc., right? So what we find is that process happens extraordinarily slowly. not by design. It's an unconscious process, right? There's an unconscious process of mutation and an unconscious process of selection. Nobody is saying, this one seems like a more true, good, and beautiful approach. Let's go with it. This seems like it'll create a good future into perpetuity. It's just these guys actually got food better or made it better, and that's what gets selected for, which can include selecting for things that move in the direction of increasing violence, dominance, capacity, whatever. But at least in nature, one of the things that happens is that the rivalrous dynamics, where power is used in a rivalrous way in a micro context, there's a symmetrical coupling of the rates of power change. So as lions are evolving to be better hunters over the course of hundreds or thousands of generations, gazelles are also evolving to get faster. Because the gazelles that make it through are better at getting away from lions, and the lions that make it through are better at getting gazelles, right? And so their reproduction times are similar enough, and their system dynamics they're embedded in are related. So you don't get asymmetries of power. You actually have a radical binding of power symmetry from lion to lion, and from gazelle to gazelle, and from lion to gazelle, and from gazelle to plant, and the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, this is key. This is actually the essential criteria that makes micro-rivalry lead to macro-symbiosis, is the symmetrical power binding. Imagine for a moment that I could make a mutation where lions got 100 times better at killing in one generation. Well, in that one generation, they would kill all the gazelles. They'd eat them all. And then they would go extinct. And so what we would find is that those species that were so much more effective than their environment could actually navigate and create resilience to would self-terminate because of their own effectiveness independent of the ecological niche they depend upon. They would be debasing the substrate upon which they depend through their overexpression. And we see this. A virus comes about that is so lethal that it kills the host before it gets to actually propagate. And then less virulent versions of that virus get to propagate more, and nature actually ends up selecting for a virus that's moving more in the direction of symbiosis than just lethality, right?
Yeah.
And so evolution itself has this symmetrical power binding. Why this is so fucking critical to understand is because nature does not select for individuals of a species, and it doesn't even select for species. It seems to over the very short term, but as you zoom out, over the long term, it selects for self-stabilizing ecological niches, where the particular members of a species that seem like they're getting selected for over the short term, that are super lethal, over the long term self-terminate. And so the things that make it through long term are these radically anti-fragile symbiotic systems. And so we get that in nature. And we look at the most badass apex predators in nature, whether we're looking at a lion or a shark or whatever, and we look at a lion killing a gazelle compared to what a human factory farm of cows looks like, right? And we look at a shark eating a tuna compared to a mile-long drift net. If fucking great whites got mile-long drift nets, the whole ocean would have not existed a long time ago. And so as soon as we developed technology and the ability to double down on technology, we broke the power symmetry. And we have to think about two applications: humans with regard to other humans, and humans with regard to the rest of nature that they depend upon. So humans with regard to other humans, the most powerful lion is not that much more powerful than the next most powerful lion, and is not even that much more powerful than the average lion or even one of the weaker lions. If you think about it, like the most powerful lion is maybe 1.1 or 1.2x more powerful than the up and coming lion, who will overtake him soon. Now look at human power distributions and say, how much more destructive power does a Putin or a Trump have than you do?
A lot.
Orders of magnitude.
Yeah. Like the ability to destroy the whole planet versus the ability to maybe hit somebody, right? And maybe you can get a gun, right? And you look at it, I don't know, is that 9? Is that 12 orders of magnitude? It's a lot. Okay, well, that's a huge fucking power asymmetry. Now, humans with regard to nature, we can cut down a forest much, much, much faster than forests can replenish. We can use up resources faster than they can replenish. We can create toxicity faster than they can replenish, etc. As a result, that's why the open loop dynamics matter so much, is because nature cannot actually process the speed of transitions that we are making, right? And because we are increasing our predatory capacity faster than the environment can evolve, because technology is a second creative process. What we would call design is a consciously mediated, abstraction-oriented process. Evolution is an unconsciously mediated, non-abstract, eminent kind of process. Evolution leads to radical interdependent complexities. Technology allows the selection over the short term of something that has independent of its relationship with the rest of the whole. And so as soon as we get that those are mathematically fundamentally different, design gives us complicated systems that are all fragile. You notice everything that humans build. The house that I'm in can't repair itself the way that a forest would if a fire took it. The computer I'm on doesn't repair itself in the way my body does. So design gives us a finite number of parameters that we can then externally build something for, right? Complicated systems, but very, very powerful. Complexity, anti-fragility, happens by self-organization. We don't really know how to do that, but we do know how to debase it. We know how to have the complicated debase the complex substrate upon which it depends. That's how we get increasing fragility until we have collapse. So why this matters is technology itself is a fundamentally new creative process in the history of local universe. It breaks the power symmetry, and as a result, it makes micro rivalry turn into macro rivalry rather than micro rivalry turn into macro symbiosis. As a result, rather than get increasing anti-fragility, we get increasing fragility towards inevitable collapse dynamics. And so what that means is the relationship between the creative process called technology, creating complicated systems, and the relationship between the evolutionary creative process, creating complex systems, the relationship between those is the thing that we actually have to change and modulate, because we still have rivalrous basis for choice, humans choosing against each other in a rivalrous way. That came from evolution, but now extended through design, technology, complicated systems, our understanding of causal principles, optimization, in a way where the rivalrous dynamics are no longer checked in a way that creates any balance. So what we actually need is a new creative process, a new process by which new stuff comes into existence that is neither evolution nor design. It is a third thing, where we're not designing parts we're not designing individual pieces of technology that empower rivalrous choice-making bases. We're not waiting for anti-rivalry at a macro level through evolutionary process. We are actually designing self-stabilizing, complex ecological niches and designing in the relationship between the complicated and the complex to be itself metastable. That, what we would call evolution by design, or sometimes referred to as transcendental design, is a actual different mathematical process of new stuff coming into being than either evolution or design is. And we can see that at the heart of it, design is all about the understanding of causation. We can understand the law, we can understand how a causal dynamic works, we can make a tool that allows us to manipulate that law, right? So science is the understanding of causation, and then technology is the application of it to have more effective causation, to be able to cause stuff at larger scale. But our basis for choice, science doesn't give us a good basis for choice because it's first person and science studies third person, which is why it said we say what is, not what ought. Our basis for choice is still coming from social Darwinism, still coming from a rivalrous evolutionary basis. Those two together is an unstable system heading towards collapse. We actually need then a theory of choice beyond game theory, beyond social Darwinism, that can be an adequate container for our causal dynamics and to be able to actually hold the relationship between choice and causation appropriate to have metastability. That is, if you want to talk about the macro level of the generator functions of X-risk, it is the relationship between choice and causation within the field of change and the necessity for a theory of and systems of right choice making at the level of individuals and collectives that can steward the level of causal power that we have through technology in ways that will create systems that are actually anti-fragile and metastable.